phone on the train station.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Quinton?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, given in light of the local planning policy number 16 about the control of advertisements and the dazzle that would likely come from such a phone, I'm feeling like all the way down Old Perth Road might preclude us from having this kind of a payphone because it would distract people while they were driving.
I think that my recommendation, or the fundamental reason why it shouldn't be in that current location, is blocking the view of drivers coming out of Parker Street and its location relative to a pram ramp. It was not to do with the level of illumination. To be fair and accountable, Mr. Simon Stewart McDawkins had concerns about visual pollution within the road reserve.
So Councillor Gage has a question. Do you have another question or your proposal?
I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Yeah, he was first.
Thank you. I was going to move the officer recommendation with an amendment. Or is that a foreshadow?
Point 3.
You can foreshadow it now, Councillor Wilson. Can you read out your amendment?
So what I'm suggesting is that we would amend point 2, replace the word deal with negotiate. So I would read, authorises the manager development services to negotiate, remove with an amended proposal for an updated Telstra smartphone facility, and then to delete the words after facility and replace with including seeking a percentage of advertising revenue for the town to be returned to council for approval.
So can I just clarify, so you're wanting, if your motion was passed, you're wanting the staff to return it to council to determine, to approve the location that they...
Yes, after having bargained hard on our behalf, they would present it to us for approval.
Okay.
Yep, happy to second that.
Hold on a sec, do you have a question?
No, I was going to...
Okay,
Yeah, I think
Councillor Gage second.
wants...
So we've got Councillor Wilson has moved the officer recommendation with those amendments. Councillor Gangel has seconded it. Is there anybody who is against? All those in favour? That is passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for being gracious, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, so while Councillor Wilson is speaking with Amy, we'll move on to item 10.4, which is the station access cycle and pedestrian upgrade for Broadway. Are there questions for the staff at this point? Councillor Wilson, was that a question?
It was, yes. So having looked at the plans, there are currently no trees in or around the cyclone. I'm just wondering if any of the discussions with the state government agencies to date have considered or envisaged the possibility of having street tree or medium strip planting as a part of the project.
Through the chair, the draft plans include a rain garden within the road reserve, and we would be looking at future additional street tree planting within the along the verge adjacent to the proposed cycle path.
So just to clarify, because councillors would have received the proposal that I had put forward for an alternative motion, which also referred to seeking to find opportunities for there to be further tree plantings.
Yes.
You've since spoken to me about one of the concept designs that was presented to council previously, where there was separation of the bicycle lanes from the road with tree islands on both sides. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that your understanding was there wasn't enough room on the road.
No, that's correct, yeah.
However, it sounded like there hadn't been investigations to whether even just one side could be accommodated, even if there wasn't enough for both sides of the road.
Yes, so when this initial proposal came to council, officers made a suggestion to council that it would be prudent to maybe request that there be additional planting, because that increases usability of these spaces, and so that was endorsed by council, and the Department of went away. The department went away and undertook the investigations. They came back in May with did a deputation and provided the plans, and that was endorsed by council. And they're the ones we went out to the cycle lane and the road carriageway. So it doesn't include that because the existing carriageway isn't wide enough to include that.
So just to clarify though.
So to clarify,
Yeah.
so for example, to what we have today, the carriageway has actually been reduced in width to its minimum. So in order to provide what was initially thought of, we'd have to potentially take a little bit of the verge away on each side in order to accommodate a planting strip next to this on-road cycling lane, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
The other issue that we just need to take into consideration as well is that the department has indicated to the town that the funding is available to the end of this year. They're not clear whether that funding would be ongoing for the future. So as to the timing of looking at reviewing these drawings, they're at 85% at the moment. So to review them would need some extra time. And the other issue is that
Councillor Hamilton had an additional question.
Yes, through the chair. I recall looking at the original plans that included the planted area dividing the cycleway from the vehicles. And it did seem that the department were able to accommodate that. The verges, as you know, in that street are extraordinarily wide. I'm curious, you mentioned a rain garden. Where would that be in these plans? Because
it's adjacent to number 747 Broadway.
okay, you are aware, of course, that the verges in this street are actually almost 30 centimetres higher than the roadway.
Yes.
So it would be extremely difficult to actually get a rain garden happening.
Yes. Yes. So we would need to undertake some road modifications and curbing modifications, similar to what we did down in Shackleton Street, where we've opened up the curb and lowered a section to provide a rain garden.
Trip hazard.
Councillor Gangel.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I'm going to lead on where you left off regarding a trip hazard. Just in relation to this, one of the issues that have been raised with me is in relation to the buses that go down Broadway, and obviously the situation that has developed around the town with the weeds being difficult for the buses to actually allow particularly elderly people to get off without there being a potential trip hazard with the weeds and the verges. So would that be incorporated as part of the buses and everything as part of this? Because you've still got that high curbing, and then you add the high curbing to the proliferation of weeds, which makes it a trip hazard for people exiting buses.
Gangel, I think you've made your point about the weeds. No need to labour it.
Yeah.
Mr. Stewart-Dawkins?
Yes, look, as I mentioned, the road carriageway has been reduced slightly in width, but it's in accordance to the Austro standards. So in regards to trip hazards, we wouldn't be deliberately designing anything which would create a trip hazard. The rain gardens, which are in Shackleton Street, haven't caused any issues to the town, and yet they're effective in regards to taking off the 1 year storm event into the rain garden and taking off the pollutants and before it goes into the drainage network into the river. So it's seen as being of a beneficial environmental outcome.
Don't sit down, because Councillor Hamilton has another question.
As somebody who lives further up in Broadway, actually buses don't travel down that part of the Broadway to the train station. They cut off and go around the back, so they actually don't travel down that part at all.
Or from the roundabout?
They go...
They go to the roundabout, then down the side street.
I think the point is, Councillor Gangel's point was not really in relation to the
very much so. We've got to make sure they're incorporated for the buses.
I think from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Simon Stewart-Dawkins, my memory of the divide was that you had the road, the planted area, which wasn't terribly wide, then you had the bicycle path, and I thought from memory that they took out the curbing, and it just curved up into the footpath. Now that's my memory of the plan, but I'm not entirely sure. But because the footpaths all along that section are quite high, they're probably the highest I've seen in any of the streets in Bassendean. So that's why I question a rain garden in that area, because I physically don't see how it can happen without creating quite a big dip.
Yes, look, all I can say is at this stage the drawings are at 85%, so there's still some further details to be produced. However, you know, conceptually, there's looking at putting a rain garden there and opening up a section of the curbing, and having a pipe that would lead the drainage water into that area.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So recently, the town has upgraded Shackleton Street to incorporate central medium.
Yes, that's correct.
Plantings.
Yes.
If this proposal was to go ahead, would there still be enough room on that road for us to put medium strip plantings at some point in the future?
Down the centre of the road. So do the road as it is and put set. No, there would still need to be probably a little bit of widening, I would suggest, because the road's been brought down to its minimum width. The carriageway has been brought down to its minimum width.
So just to confirm, if this proposal was to go ahead as it's been presented to the community, that would prevent us in future from being able to put medium strip planting unless we pretty much removed all of the works that are going to be put in and moved them further out.
Yes, that's correct. There is a possibility, I suppose, of undertaking further verge planting, heavier verge planting, to provide a stronger canopy. Because at the moment the canopy, while it's got some double plantings there, I think it's probably could be further enhanced to provide a better canopy along that whole area.
Okay, so on that note, did you have a question?
I just wanted to understand the reasoning behind the corner of Broadway and Ivanhoe, where the bike is forced up onto footpath rather than going around that corner. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes. Could you just ask the question one more time then?
So I'm just understanding the reasoning why the path doesn't extend around the corner and instead the bicyclist is forced up onto the footpath?
Yes. Look, I don't have the details here, but I was thinking maybe it was to do with the. Look, I don't have those details. I'm sorry, I can't give you categorically what the reason would be. Often it's to do with infrastructure, which might be there, but that doesn't appear to be the case.
Would you mind following that up a bit?
Yes, I
so
can.
That we can have an answer for Councillor Quinton. Obviously, there is some concerns about the plans as they currently are, especially in relation to what we've talked about trying to achieve in the town for streets like this. So councillors, and I think staff as well, saw that I circulated an alternative motion to the officer's recommendation. So councillors, I'd like to move the alternative motion. So point 1 is as written in the officer's recommendation, but point 2 has been altered and reads that council requests that the town liaise further with the PTA before finalisation of plans for the station access cycle and pedestrian upgrade in Broadway Bassendean, particularly in relation to opportunities for improving amenity and the planting of trees along the cycle route. And I'd like to add in including the possibility of median planting. Councillor Mikachuk, are you seconding that? Okay. Sorry, Councillor
question, Your Worship. Didn't I hear the officer say that wouldn't be feasible, the medium strip plans?
No, what they said was if we went ahead with the plans as they currently are,
yes,
in the future it wouldn't be feasible.
Okay, and just to clarify, there's 2 bus stops in this location.
Thank you, Councillor Gabriel. Okay, so I've moved the motion. I think Councillor Mikachuk seconded. Did you have a question or were you? No? Okay, so anybody against? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.5 is the draft emission reduction plan. Are there questions for the staff on this item?
So many.
So many?
I thought we were going to...
Yes, just prepare it.
Okay, so there have been quite a few discussions around this plan and the fact that there is the opportunity for this to be something that is a whole of organisation owned plan, and I think Peter used the terms a lens through which we operate. So I'd like to propose a deferral motion. Obviously, Jeremy Walker's put a lot of effort into this, and it's not to detract from his effort, but I think there's opportunities for us to potentially do a little bit more and set our targets higher. So the proposed deferral motion is that Council 1 defers consideration of the draft emissions reduction plan to allow for the development of a more aspirational target, and 2, investigates the One Planet Council's model as a possible option for the town of Bassendean. Councillor,
I'll second that.
seconded. Do you have a question?
No, can you just read 2 again?
So 2 is that Council investigates the One Planet Council's model as a possible option for the town of Bassendean.
And what is the One Planet?
So I don't know what the word is to try and... What word would you use to describe it?
I'd suggest it's a sustainability framework. But it's something, I guess it's what drives the organisation, it's underpinning philosophy. So for example, if we were to embark upon our next planning cycle, I think Renee referred to the lens, it would be the filter at which we would look at everything through. So our priorities, our decision making, our behaviours, our values. City of Fremantle is the first local government to have adopted
in Western Australia,
the One Planet Council plan, and it's something that they're using to drive a lot of their planning priorities.
So Councillor Gangel, I wasn't suggesting that we would be make a decision about that, but rather that it be something that we investigate and make a decision upon once we have all that information available to us. Councillor Wilson?
So just to be clear, this report or this draft plan, does it confine itself just to the activities of our town as an entity, or does it talk about the general community that's within the boundaries?
So the targets are related to our own operations, as in the town, but there are projects listed in there which are community orientated projects. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And one of the reasons why I was proposing to defer it was at the moment the target set in there, I think it's 26 to 28%, which is very... Pardon? Well, it's particularly low compared to other international targets, and I thought, there's also a phrase in there that refers to the town of Bassendean wanting to be a leader in this space, and at the moment those two statements don't readily match. Okay, so I've moved it. Did we have a seconder? Was that Councillor Hamilton has seconded? Is there anybody against? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. 10.6, the River Parks Committee Instrument of Appointment and Delegation. Councillor Mikachuk.
I just would like some further clarity on that through the chair. So at the briefing session we kind of explored that it was at the wish of some of the state government departments that they not necessarily have voting rights, and I was interested in whether it was one of those departments in particular, or whether they were all asked, or whether there was each individual entity said they didn't want voting rights, or just a bit more kind of specific information on that.
It was a general conversation at the River Parks Committee in regards to this particular issue, and I believe it was the Department of Planning who voiced the initial comment, and then the Department of Biodiversity kind of followed it up, but it wasn't, we haven't actually sought formal feedback from them, it's just been a verbal discussion at the committee.
Okay. And just following on from that, for example, I don't think there was a DFES representative. Would they have had the opportunity to give feedback about whether they wanted voting rights or not?
No, through the chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Quinton?
Yes, I just wondered in these informal discussions whether it was explained to them that they could abstain from voting by declaring some kind of conflict of interest, or just any other mechanism under the standing orders, and that they could leave the room if they felt that it was encroaching on their ability to represent their own department.
Yes, so in that particular case, if they felt there's a conflict of interest, they'd actually need to remove themselves from the room and wouldn't be able to participate in it or provide any context or any information to assist the committee members, so that they'd have to exclude themselves completely. So whereas council is wanting them to be participate in those discussions. So you've kind of got a bit of a difficult position there, because then they have to exclude themselves and then they can't contribute to their discussions. So it's I suppose it's quite a difficult situation with this particular committee.
Councillor Hamilton?
So, is it not correct that we have another committee where staff members can vote?
Sorry, what's...
Is it not correct that we have another committee where staff members can participate and vote?
Is it? I'm not sure which committee you might be referring to.
Emergency.
Yes, that is, but that comes under different legislation. So.
Okay. Sorry if I sounded confused there, but it is confusing when you go to a meeting, various meetings, and a staff member who has a certain perspective can sit in a meeting, give that perspective and vote on it. So, you know, here we are debating whether state government representatives who are very knowledgeable can actually participate in a meeting, and if they're willing to abstain from voting, I'm not entirely sure that that would exclude them from conveying their information. Obviously the meetings have been conducted in a different format at the beginning of the year, so this is a little bit confusing. So if they are bona fide members of the committee, nominated members of the committee, named members of the committee, can they actually participate in the discussions but not vote?
So if we approach the various departments and ask them to nominate a person, then that person would be permitted to vote. If they perceived that there would be a conflict of interest regarding a particular issue, they would have to declare that interest and potentially remove themselves from the room and not participate in the discussions. If council's looking at potentially going down that, and look, the other thing is the report indicated that sometimes government departments change, you know, in regards to the personnel, the staff changes, and which means then council would have to find another person. Potentially, if council wanted to, they could say, we'll provide the name of a representative plus a deputy in case that person's not able to attend. That could be another option if council wished to go down the road of actually nominating a person. The proposal here is simply to assist with the process of the government departments providing the information that to the committee, and so that the committee then can provide a recommendation to council.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Brown?
Question, I can't see where a government representative cannot be conflicted. They're operating on a different agenda. They're not necessarily council members. So I can understand why they would not necessarily participate in the voting. More of a statement than a question.
It is definitely more of a statement.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Mikachuk.
Yeah, I think with all that discussion, I'm happy to move that recommendation.
Okay. Is there anyone who'd like to second? Councillor Gangel? Is there anybody against? Councillor Hamilton, would you like to debate? Councillor Hamilton? No? Okay, so we'll put it to the vote then. All those in favour? Councillor McLennan, Gangel, Mikachuk and Quinton and Brown. And against? Councillor Wilson and Hamilton. So that is carried. 10.7, the Sparks Urban Learning Centre Risk Mitigation Options for Tree Roots. Questions? Councillor Quinton? No? No questions?
If we want, yes, sorry, I do have a question. I think I have asked this. If we wanted to put in some remedial works, when would that be done, and what time frame are we looking at in terms of the operating hours of the daycare centre?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The childcare centre is closing for a period of 2 weeks over the Christmas break, and that desirably would be when the remedial works are conducted, bearing in mind that is only a week or so away. So desirably it would be achieved during that time, but that would be conditioned on logistics being able to achieve it.
Councillor Hamilton?
timeline on this matter seems to have been quite drawn out. Now, the first arborist report was in 2017. The last arborist report was 4 months ago. So, and that was only to value the trees, the second report, not the first report was actually indicating the issues. So this leaves us in a little bit of a quandary, because with Christmas break coming up, there's obviously no time to come up with an alternative that can be implemented. So if this, whatever is decided by council, can't be implemented over the Christmas break, which is obvious, do you see a way of actually implementing whatever council decides, and how would that happen?
Yes, indeed. Under licensing, an exemption would be sought for exclusion from the playground area for the period of redevelopment, and that is invariably a procedural process and is not problematic. There would be an attempt to look at an alternative, most suitable time. Potentially we could go out to Easter, to April, where there would be a block of days where the service would be not operating, and it may well be possible to get the exemption to one side or the other. For instance, as just an example, we would need to work with the lessee on the most suitable arrangement from their perspective.
Sorry, I have a question then. If we can wait until Easter, why can't we defer this until the February council meeting?
I was merely making that as an example. I'm not necessarily suggesting that would be desirable. Right? As Councillor Hamilton said, this item has been around with officers for some period, and the lessee is now aware that it is at before council tonight. It would be desirable if we could get an outcome.
Councillor Ganger?
Yes, sorry, that leads me on to a question. The officer recommendation itself, though, officers obtained 2 quotations on the implementation of option 2 for the relocation of the playground with associated groundworks and fence extension versus the viability of implementing option 3 for the removal of both flooded gum trees. So that would be done, under my understanding, in 2 weeks.
Certainly we would prepare the cost estimates in that period, yes.
Yes, but I thought we just heard that we were looking to get it done in 2 weeks. So the officer recommendation in itself doesn't enable it to actually get done in 2 weeks. So you'd have to push it out in any case to potentially Easter, the officer recommendation, or into the new year.
I think it's a very good point, Councillor Ganger. I think it would be quite difficult to get the costings and the work done over Christmas at the short notice. Councillor Mikachuk?
I've just got a question in regards to, through the Chair, a risk being identified and the implications of council not making a decision this evening, and in regards to potential liability.
It was brought to the town's attention as a consequence of an injury having occurred with one of the workers. And that being the case, the town did engage LGIS in conducting an investigation into the most suitable solutions, as well as the arborist report.
Can I just clarify that? So in the report it refers to January 2017 as the time frame when that occurred, which is quite some time ago now. I don't imagine that an extra, even if it's 8 weeks to February, would have a huge impact on the timeline. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
All right, got questions everywhere. Councillor Hamilton, then Councillor Wilson.
Reading the arborist report, it seems to me that the extensive application of soft fill across the site has possibly negatively affected the trees, and the fact that it's right up around the trunks, to me also seems to indicate that there's little water getting to the trees. So now that we're coming into the summertime, and given that the trees are obviously showing signs of stress, would you assume that it might be advantageous, if we are going to try to rehabilitate the trees, that we do that sooner rather than later?
I'm certainly no arborist, but I would assume that to be the case, yes.
Councillor Wilson, did you have a question?
Yes, so the injury that happened, was that a workers' compensation claim or a public liability claim?
It was workers' compensation.
So that would be a matter then for the employer?
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
We have an officer's recommendation before us, and I'm getting the impression people are not particularly comfortable with it at this point in time. Does anybody have an alternative they would like to propose?
I do have an alternative motion, but I sense that councillors may wish to defer this item.
Can you please try?
I will read out the alternative motion at the prompting of Councillor Nicotchuk.
That's not necessarily...
So point 1 remains the same as the officer's recommendation. Point 2, I go to officers obtain quotations on the reconfiguration of existing on-site play equipment together with live landscaping and planter boxes that render the protruding roots a non-trip hazard. And 3, delegate to the CEO authority to complete works not exceeding a total value of $10,000 maximum. 4, that the leasee permanently remove the soft fill within the primary play area prior to the commencement of works by the town at a time mutually agreed to by both parties. 5, that the leasee contributes actually point 5 I will leave off.
Okay, so what you've circulated, point 1 to 4, excluding point 5. So are you actually moving this motion, or are you just reading it out for the benefit of Councillor Nicotchuk?
I'll move it.
Okay, do you have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay, and then I'm
just wondering on point 4, the legality of that the leasee permanently remove the soft fall within the primary play area prior to commencement of works by the town at a time mutually agreed by both parties. What's the legalities in relation to that point 4?
My understanding is that the regulations have changed since the time the soft fall was installed more than 10 years ago, such that a more natural play environment is now encouraged, and the risk-averse position that once did prevail is now almost actively discouraged.
Yeah, but I'm just wanting to know whether or not the town has enforcement powers to actually implement point 4. Not what the current regulations are, but regulations aren't retrospective. I'm asking what enforcement powers the town actually has for point 4.
Within the lease.
Yeah. So if the leasee said no, it's there, I'm not removing it.
Yeah.
What options does the town have?
The playground is actually a responsibility of the lessee and is included in the lease accordingly.
Yeah.
I would think the leverage would come from the financial inducement that the town is seeking to make through this recommendation, and I would be very surprised if the lessee is not accommodating.
Yes, thank you. Just a further question then. So under this motion, what council's asking is for the lessee to remove what's currently there and the outside perimeter of the building, substantially, I believe, at their own cost, and put in a more modern soft fall area. Is that what would occur?
No.
So it seems that there's quite complicated discussions going on without the lessee being involved in them at this point. I understand what you're trying to achieve, Councillor Hamilton, but it sounds like we're not under such tight timeframes as we initially thought. Are you comfortable with, I think you were suggesting that possibly moving a deferral motion. Are you of that mind?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm happy with 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so sorry, Councillor Brown had a question, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Thank you. Obviously, the tree's under a great deal of stress. Is it possible, or have we considered treating? There's 2 issues here. The one of the trip hazard and one of the health of this magnificent tree. Is it possible to treat them as well? It could be. Is it possible to treat these 2 items separately and have some urgent remedial action done to remove that, what do you call it? Plastic pyro, whatever it is, from around the tree, and try and save this tree as a matter of urgency. We're leading into a very hot, dry summer, it's likely. And by the time we do have some action, that tree may very well be dead and the whole thing's got to be removed. So my point is, have we considered treating these two issues separately? The health of the tree and the trip hazard. Is that possible to do and get some urgent action taken to relieve the distress of that tree?
Yes, it was. That was the purpose for the arborist report, indeed, was to provide us with some direction in that regard. The direction sought from council was to resolve the issue from the lessee's perspective. Certainly we can address removal of soft fall and replacement with bark or something along those lines that can then provide a much better environment for the tree to recover.
So, Mr. Haggett, can I clarify? So you're suggesting that in the immediate future, the staff could focus on trying to do some emergency work to save the tree, and at the same time there's a possibility of deferring decision on how we're going to manage the risk around the trip hazard and have some discussions with the lessee around that?
Yes, look, I'm sure that we can come to an amicable outcome.
Was there another question over this side that I missed?
I apologise that it's not a question, and I very rarely do this, but just in regards to the report, it mentioned that there were both in the arborist and the LGIS, it says council cannot do nothing because the risk is identified. So I just want to double check that people are comfortable that.
So again, those risks were identified in January 2017. Peter, you indicated that
Yeah, I guess what we've got here is conflicting regulations. So obviously we have a desire to do everything we can to retain the tree. I guess from an employer's perspective, they have a requirement to provide a safe working environment. There's been a trip hazard already, so the risk's already been identified. Obviously workers' compensation came into play then. So I guess my question, Graham, is if we do remediate the tree, would the business owners be happy with the arrangement in terms of providing a safe work environment?
Can I suggest that, that an outcome of tonight would be for the soft fall to be removed and that bark chips to be installed in its stead in the vicinity of the trunk of the tree, such that the tree can take on more water, and that be an outcome that we would hope to achieve tonight, regardless of whether or not we resolve to retain or remove.
Councillor
I
Hamilton?
have a question for the officer.
Yes, of course.
I'm sure that I read somewhere in the LGIS report that, or perhaps it was whilst we're on site, that there are trip hazards with the soft fall anyway, because there's multiple torn pieces. So there's already trip hazards with that particular product. I could potentially move this motion with an additional dot point that indicates that staff liaise with the leasee regarding these measures before we implement. Depends how agreeable council is to that, but that might be a way forward. And we have another.
Okay, so where we're at the moment, we've got Councillor Hamilton's alternative motion. You're suggesting that adding hold on a second.
A last dot point along the lines that instruct staff to enter into discussions with the leasee, the above mentioned proposals prior to implementation.
Okay, you've got that, Amy? Yes.
Yes, please.
Just with the
budget.
Sorry? Yeah. Just with the budget, item 3, we would probably need an absolute majority.
Yes. Okay. Thank
and
you.
that the budget be amended accordingly would be another little line.
Okay.
I just wanted to see if Councillor Hamilton would consider changing the beginning of point 2 to immediately start works on reconfiguration of the existing on-site play equipment.
Yeah. Sorry.
And at the end of that, just say subject to discussions with the leasing.
Okay, so we've got nothing in there about the immediate actions for. We've got the removing of the soft fall. So that, I guess that's covered off. And so you're suggesting now you want to change Councillor Hamilton to amend her motion to immediately start works
on the reconfiguration of existing on-site play equipment together with live landscaping and planter boxes that render the protruding routes non-trip hazard.
Okay.
We're delegating to the CEO anyway in point 3, so, and there's going to be, has to be negotiation with the leasee, so I don't know that you can immediately start.
Councillors, can I suggest that we defer a decision on what's actually going to happen with the tree, and in the interim the staff can put the measures in place that Councillor Mr Haggett identified, so looking at removing the soft fall and putting the bark chips in place, and then in the interim there can be some discussions with the business owner and potentially could come back to us in February once those discussions have been undertaken. Would that sound reasonable?
Yes. Sounds reasonable.
Okay. I'm not sure how we're wording that, but maybe we can just say that we're going to defer the decision on the, where are we? On the risk mitigation options for the tree roots, and in the interim staff will further discuss options with the business owner. You don't need specific instruction around the emergency care for the tree. Okay, so I'll move the deferral motion. Is there a seconder?
Sorry, can I
Councillor Wilson? Yes.
Are you still, point 1 says that council receives the report.
Yes, we can receive the report and then we'll defer. Yes, from point 2 down.
Including that point, okay.
Does anybody need that read out?
No, I'm just wondering whether we need to include a bit about bark chips and emergency measures.
We can do. Mr Haggett assures me that that has been heard and that action will be taken. Okay, so I've moved it. Who seconded the motion? Councillor Hamilton. Anybody against? All those in favour? Passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Amy, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. 10.3, sorry, 10.8, the annual report for the year ended June 2018. No questions? Okay, do we have a mover then for the officer recommendation? Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Gangel. All those in favour? Passed unanimously. 10.9, this is the RFT for the drainage pipe. Councillor Hamilton, I believe you had a question on this.
No? Well, I did have a question, but Mr Simon Stewart-Dawkins answered it 5 minutes before the meeting started.
Is it something that the rest of us should know the answer to?
I did ask whether in the contract, if there were any variations that could be applied by, if they came across problems. But Mr Dawkins, I'll let him answer.
So yes, the confidential attachment provided for councils, it does provide the unit rates for various activities. So those units rates are based off the calculations of on-site drawings, and of course they've provided a lump sum fee there. So we're not anticipating any variation. The only after Councillor Hamilton spoke to me this evening, the only one I thought about was that last year when we did some similar drainage works, we did have an issue in regards to root penetration into one of our drainage systems, and it was quite an extensive route, which required us to do some further digging to try and resolve the problem. So that did create a bit of a problem for us. But look, I don't expect to be any significant variation because we've got the unit rates there.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions on this item? Okay, so we've got an officer recommendation. Is there somebody who's willing to move? Councillor Gangel, seconder. Councillor Mikachuk. Anybody against? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 10.10, this is a call from notices of motion for the National General Assembly in 2019. Councillor Hamilton?
I was going to suggest, having read this, any notices of motion do not have to be submitted until March. So I'm not sure about other councillors, but I haven't really had enough time to give this much consideration, and I would like the time to consider it over the Christmas period, so I was hoping that maybe we might defer it until the February meeting.
I just had a question around that. Was there a reason why it was presented at this time that would...
I think it just came in. And
okay. Yes. Okay, so Councillor Hamilton's proposing deferral. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mikachuk. Anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.11, design and implementation of the community and stakeholder engagement strategy. Councillor Gandhi.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I did bring the CEO's attention to this yesterday afternoon. There just needs to be a correction in the officer recommendation, because it should be attachment, I believe, 10. Not XX.
Yep. You got that, maybe? In point 1? Did you have a question as well, or just a...
No, look, I thank the CEO for providing me with the additional information today to my queries that I asked. So I don't think I've got anything further.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay. Do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Mikachuk, seconded Councillor Brown. Anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So moving on to 10.15 now, which is accounts for payment. Councillor Hamilton, you wanted that one out of en bloc?
yes. Okay. So on page 5 of the payment figures, we have a monthly payment every month to Clean Industrial Services Proprietary Limited. This is for various buildings of cleaning. The figure is $25,502.53. Now, up until June or July this year, that figure was actually $17,937 per month. So that actually equates to a 42% increase in the monthly charge for cleaning of buildings around the town. So I'm curious about how we've ended up with a 42% increase from a contractor from one financial year to the next.
Well, I'm just wondering, because cleaning happens over a month, it could be 4 weeks to 5 weeks. That's one of the reasons, maybe. But one of the things about this is that we don't have all the information here. So if you could possibly just give me a call and I could provide that information to you.
Okay. The other question that you can take on notice for this one as well is that the amounts, whether it was 17,900 or, and I will say that these amounts are static each month. Sure. The 17,937 was static for as many months as I checked back, and then the new financial year it changed up to 25,502. I believe that was static, but I haven't checked every month. So this is over and above the tender threshold. So I'm assuming Clean Industrial have been engaged by the town under a tender.
Yes, that's, yeah.
Okay.
This is their last year. The tender actually finishes in 30th of April, and there'll be a new tender coming to council early next year.
Okay. So if I could have information about that. Okay. Okay, page 8. We've got $4,016, which is not an amount I'd normally pay attention to, except it's for painting the pensioner guard cottage and the fence. The fence which is going to come down next year, and the pensioner guard cottage which is going to be restored next year. So I'm curious as to why we're expending money on something that is a project which is going to come to its finalisation next year.
I'll take it on notice.
Okay.
What page was that? Sorry, Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry?
What page was that?
That was page
And what number?
8.
8 of 12.
But what number?
Okay,
So
let me
it's
just
about
halfway down.
Yeah.
EFT 36554.
Oh yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Just a general one. I note that we are still giving out kids' sports vouchers, but I thought that we had allocated zero budget to that during the budget process. And I'm curious why we're still giving out the vouchers.
So we would give it out because it's a state government.
Yeah, they give us the money.
They give us the money for us to give to them.
Okay. I thought.
So it's not actually coming out of our budget.
Okay. We do seem to be exceeding the recommended maximum that the government recommends for those vouchers. I think it's 150. So I'm not sure what the deal is with that.
We can find out.
Okay. Now I have brought this one up before, and I'm curious about the Bassendean tennis courts because I note that we're paying about $530 per week for maintenance of the tennis courts. I'd like to know what this maintenance involves, given that there's a very small number and size of these courts. And I'd also like to know why the town provides this financial assistance when the bowling club next door independently manage and pay for their own grounds upkeep and maintenance. So, on notice, right? Far Lane, Economic Development Strategy Preparation, 3,954. What's that? I have no idea what that is.
Is that the consultant report that William Barry was working with?
That's correct.
For what?
Yeah.
Okay. But I thought William Barry was the Economic Development Officer.
Well, it's like the planning one we just spent $140,000 on.
Can't I pay someone to do the job that I want to do?
Councillors, come on.
We have Learning Fundamentals, Economic Development, Smart Busy program. What's that?
It was fantastic, that's what it was.
Okay, right.
It was a series of workshops that was offered to members of the community, and the title was Smart Busy, and I can highly recommend it.
Okay.
How many people attended?
I don't know, maybe about 20.
Okay.
2025?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Bearing in mind, on page 2, or actually it's on a couple of pages, but the total is $936 for milk for 35 and 46 and 48 Old Perth Road. Can I ask why we don't buy that locally?
I think you've asked that before.
I know, and I don't get it. I really
We don't have a milkman in town.
Oh, we got
We don't.
$2 a litre.
Coles.
$1 a litre. So,
Undercutting our dairy farmers, Councillor Hamilton.
That's for baby cows anyway.
Okay. Now, the Bassendean markets, we've got a couple of charges here that we pay out every month. So we pay out $1,835 per month for a stallholder coordinator. We also, that's over $20,000 a year per annum. We also pay the Rotary Club of Swan Valley a management fee, which is $1,400 per month. And then there's other auxiliary things like $400, $500 for traffic management, which I don't mind. I'm just curious why these services are outsourced when the town originally employed a manager for the markets who is still employed by the town. It appears that stallholder coordinator is paid more than the annual revenue from the stalls. And I'm curious about where I think the markets are great, don't get me wrong, but I don't understand why some of these things are not done in-house. So, and I don't understand why we seem to have a stallholder coordinator and the Rotary Club, and they're both managing the markets.
So the stallholder coordinator is the person who allocates the stalls, liaises with the stallholders, with all of their queries through the month, meets them and directs them to their site on the day, and is responsible for the liaison with the stallholder in the town. The Rotary Club assist in the setup and the runaround on the day. They're not involved in any management any longer. So the coordinator has taken over the management function that Rotary once did have. So it's separation
but
there.
We're paying.
So the town now receives all of the income from the stallholders, and that offsets the cost of the coordination.
Do you have further questions you'd like to ask?
No. I see that Hamilton Street, the sewer and the installation of power, the famous
Land swap?
Land swap come dirt pile site is that the sewer and the power have now been installed. Congratulations, we came in under budget on that. So it was 16,884, so we allocated 30,000 budget for that. So that's great, we came in under budget on that. My question is that we also allocated 50 or 60,000, can't remember now, for removal of the remainder of the soil after spending almost 200,000. So I see that it's still sitting there. Is there going to ever be an end to this land swap?
The land swap.
It's a new foray.
I'm stalling when Simon gets back in the room. So the land swap will probably conclude within the next 2 or 3 months. Where we're at with that now is getting the surveyors to complete the subdivision, and then we'll transfer the land. But the supplementary question was, when is the stockpile going to?
We're just waiting for the soil to dry out, and we're anticipating that to occur. That will go back in there in January, and we'll test the soil, and then we can start to screen it and remove that soil. Or spoil, not. Yeah.
Let's keep our fingers crossed, everybody.
Yeah, as I recall last
No rain.
year, it was the same time, and the contractor had some machinery breakdowns, and then winter arrived before the contractor fixed his machinery.
That's correct.
I think Mr. Stewart-Dawkins is well aware that we're quite anxious for this dirt pile to be
so we did
removed
actually
as
start
quick as
that.
possible.
We did actually start that work, but because there wasn't sufficient funds in the budget, we had to come back to council, and so there was the delay. So.
Okay, last one, because I don't want to read the rest. We've got retech repairs on page 8 of $8,580. Now, residents, I don't know which reserves these relate to, but I've had some residents indicate to me that the retech is being damaged by the lawn mowing. So could we perhaps investigate that instead of constantly going down and fixing the retech because the lawn mowing is killing the retech? It's a bit of a cycle.
We do get a little bit of vandalism from people when the sprinklers are on, going on and kicking the sprinklers off as well, and generally the sprinklers are set at a level that when they retract, they're actually below the turf level. So yes, that's all I can say at this stage.
So, Councillor Hamilton, obviously you've got quite a few questions, as you always do. We appreciate your amazing attention to detail. Maybe for the next meeting, it would be good if we sat down in advance of the meeting, maybe with Peter and Mike won't be here, but Ken, and go over some of those things, because I think some of the reason why you're identifying them is because you're looking for value for money and efficiencies, and maybe they're best addressed if we can look at some of the underlying
Definitely,
processes.
and I can assure you too, we're about to commence a holistic review of procurement practices within the town, and I think some of your concerns will be addressed. So it will not only look at the procurement policy, but our underpinning practices and procedures, and I think as a next stage we'll do that spend analysis, and Mike has generously done some initial work around that, but looking at our patterns of expenditure over the years, which will allow us to be a little bit sharper, I guess, in our sourcing. So we'll be a little bit more strategic in our sourcing practices, so we can get greater value for money where we've got consecutive spend, particularly on consistent items over many years.
I would also mention that I would normally send an email with all of these. However, because the financials only come in on the Friday and there's so many other things to go through in the budget, that usually it ends up asking the questions at the OCM.
Yeah. And that's another thing I'd like to see happen in 2019, allowing council some more time in terms of receiving papers and having the chance to ask questions before council meeting.
Councillor Wilson, are you moving the officer recommendation, or are you asking a question?
A single question
Okay.
before we go on, if that's acceptable. Thank you, Your Worship. My question relates to page 9 of 12 of the attachments. Item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the bottom. I'm delighted to see that the aqua bubbler with water bottle refilling station has been purchased. And I'm wondering if any of the staff would be able to give me an indication as to when that might be installed.
Yes, it's been purchased, and we're just waiting for Water Corporation to finalise the water meter. I understand that was the last I heard, which was about 2 weeks ago.
So are you flagging that because you'd like to know in advance of it going in for communication with the community?
Yes.
Yes.
If it's possible that, as the mover of the motion, I might be advised when installation is occurring.
We're going to have a launch party.
Yes, we'll have a launch.
I think what Councillor Wilson is also saying is there was a lot of interest in this when he first shared it with the community, so it'd be excellent if he was able to share that he's delivered on that to the people of.
And also that sometimes when things happen, it happens outside of our visibility and we stumble across them quite by happenstance rather than being informed about them.
No problem.
Thank you. Okay, now do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Okay, I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Brown. Anybody against? All those, you're against, Councillor?
No, I'm in favour.
All those in favour?
I was too quick.
Carried unanimously. 10.16, financial statements. Now, Councillor Hamilton, did you have some questions around the budget amendments?
Yep.
On page...
Just trying to find the page.
It's not numbered, I don't think, but it is.
It's page 21.
It's page 188 of 196 of the...
Oh, sorry, it's page 21 of the attachment. Attachment 13.
Yes, it is, you're right.
Well, my first question is very simple. When we print these out in hard copy, can the graph be flipped around so I can actually read it? That would be excellent. There's been some movements around, again, some public event programs have come in under budget by 1,000 or 2,000. Then this has been shimmied across to cover a shortfall in the charging station of $3,000. Then we've got the emergency services program, where $8,000 has been transferred over to events. So I find this a little bit sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, we take $3,000 from events that have come in under budget, push it over to something else. Then we take $8,000 from another department or program and shimmy it back across to events. So this is rather difficult for councillors to keep track of. And perhaps we're not supposed to keep track of it, but many of us would actually like to know these things and to understand the logic behind it. I personally am not sure how the mindset is on this one, but I come from a background where I would have thought that you try and keep your surpluses and expenditure within the same department so you know how well that department is functioning. So if events needed money, they could draw money down from events where they've actually not spent so much money to push across to events where they're spending more money. At least that would give us some idea of how those departments are functioning. But to crisscross like that, I find that difficult to follow.
I guess just one general statement, it's one budget. So there is no departmental bank account or range of numbers that just sit within one department. So if we need funds in other areas, we have the opportunity, and we explain this to council that that's what we're doing. I mean, there's no real reason why money that we're not using in events couldn't be used for other purposes.
Okay. If we go back to the budget process, Councillor Quinton quarantined any surplus that's going to result from the tree planting program so that it could be reallocated by council. So I'm not sure how other councils behave in this area. I don't know. So this is why I'm asking the staff the question, because I find this difficult to follow.
So with the trees, I guess if we weren't spending the money on the trees and you wanted to set aside next year for trees, we would then put it in the reserve funds to bring it forward again the following year. That would be the way we would do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Gandry?
Thank you, Your Worship. It brings me to a question that you've highlighted. Just wondering why the severe cost blowout for the electronic car parking station. What was that attributed to?
Before you have your question answered, you need to say electric car.
Electric. What did I say?
I'm going to educate you on this, Councillor Gandry.
What did I say? Sorry?
Electronic.
Oh, there you go. You're saying yes, yes. Maybe we put out the wrong tender.
the analogue council again.
So yes, through the chair. So the electric charging station, the budget that was put forward by the staff was correct in 6,000. But what happened was they forgot about the signage and the road marking, and so they allocated it to the same account number. So you can see there above. Street signs and walkway maintenance. We've actually re-journaled it back to the account where it should have been allocated. So initially, when the officer booked it out, it should have been allocated to those two account numbers, and they didn't do that. So we've just journaled it to correct that situation.
Thank you for the clarification.
And just one further question. Just when we had the launch, unfortunately, I could not make it that day. I missed it, unfortunately.
It was a good afternoon tea.
I'm sure it was. That's why I'm disappointed I missed it. Just wondering, was there a plaque unveiled for it?
No, there was no plaque.
No, okay, thank you.
Okay, now that you've been satisfied, would you like to move the office recommendation?
Oh, yes. No.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson has a question.
Thank you. I refer to page 15 of the monthly investment report.
With the pie charts?
Yes. In the bottom left-hand corner of the page, it talks about our progress towards divesting from fossil fuels. And I've had a look at the diversity of investments that we've got in non-fossil fuel lending ADIs. And I noticed that some of those non-fossil fuel lending ADIs are performing better than the fossil fuel ADIs based on a percentage return. And I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity coming up in the near future for us to adjust our investment profile so that we can increase the amount of funds that we've got that are divested from fossil fuels.
It's a good point. We've also previously been up to 76, or it might have been 78%. That was the highest that we had divested, and now we're down to only 59%, which is a little disappointing.
Yes, hence the reason for my question, Your Worship.
Maybe we're running out of money.
But as Councillor Wilson pointed out, the return on the non-fossil fuel is actually better.
In some instances,
yes.
So I'm wondering when the next opportunity arises for us to shift our money around?
Well, yes, we can do that. It's all depending on our investment policy, where we can only keep so much money with one institution, we will diversify.
Okay, Councillor Gandry, did you move that motion?
Yes.
Seconder? Councillor Mikachuk? All those in favour? Passed unanimously. 10:18, Councillor Gandry, you wanted the calendar.
Thank you. I thought I'd give Councillor Hamilton one last opportunity for the outrageous situation that's eventuated where we won't have a council meeting in January, leaving the good people of Bassendean without the ability to ask the council questions and keep us accountable. So
your question,
I'm asking Councillor Hamilton. I remember her very fairly and squarely standing there, outraged that we did not have a council meeting in January, and there was an ability. I think she counted out. It may have been 60 or 70 odd days that people had to go without asking a question of council. So one last opportunity, Councillor Hamilton. 3, 2, 1. Because I'm going to move the calendar. So just letting you know, you've been exposed as a hypocrite. Thank you.
So, Councillor Gager, seeing as you didn't get to use the word munted tree in an earlier motion, I'm give you this opportunity. So we've had a mover of the motion, a seconder. Have you got a question?
Sorry, Your Worship. Whilst entertained by Councillor Gager's contribution, I think that in reflection he might like to withdraw the accusation of hypocrisy as it might be unseen.
I will withdraw, but somebody who has one position on one side and another position on another side may indeed be described in such a way, but I will withdraw.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gadgil and Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gadgil, you've moved the opposite recommendation.
Yes.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hamilton, I thought you were seconding.
No.
Do you really have a question? What is your question, Councillor Hamilton?
No, I'm just laughing too much.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So it was moved, Councillor Ganger, seconded, Councillor Mercachuk. 1019, implementation of council resolutions. Councillor Hamilton. So just some background. Peter and I had a discussion earlier in the week and with the CMT about the fact that consistently these are coming up to council and there's recommended for deletion for some where there's the actions proposed and haven't actually been completed. I think the consensus was that in future, unless something had actually been finalised and we could tick it off from an accountability perspective, that we would not be expecting to see them on the agenda. Is that correct understanding of?
Yeah, I think Councillor Hamilton suggested that we keep them on until after they're completed and implemented.
I must admit I wrote that email prior to reading your email later that day regarding some other matters. So I do think it falls into, there's a little bit of a grey area. I do think that anything that's like a project, a physical job that has to be done, I do think those things should not come back to us for deletion until they're actually done. And the reason the email was sent for the benefit of the councillors was regarding the signs in North Road which have not yet been installed, and that I think was deleted in June. So that's why I brought it up. But there are other ones where we might have 4 or 5 dot points in a motion, and substantially it might have been completed, but there's one remaining outstanding. I do understand that that's sometimes a little bit more difficult, and I also understand that the older it gets, sometimes the more out of date or out of relevance that dot point might become, whatever it might be. So there are some little grey areas there. It's not as black and white as what I might have made out in my email.
So are there some on tonight's agenda that you were wanting to not
Well,
have
there
deleted?
was... There's 2 of them. The bottom one of the first page, page 65, I don't believe a workshop date has been organised.
No, I had a question mark against that as well. So that was your motion, Councillor Brown, about incentives for local businesses?
Yes, it was, and I was going to have some.
Okay, so we'll leave that one.
Requested that be deleted, well, not deleted, that be remain.
Okay, so Amy, have you got that? That's the
Which number is it?
ROC 17/57461.
57461.
That's correct.
There's another one on the top of page 66, and I'm actually not sure whether it's the top one or the second one. Again, it was supposed to be a workshop organised, but I don't believe that's been organised. A date has been organised yet.
Okay, so they're both good examples where I can't tell from looking at this what exactly
Yeah,
the
and
motion
I
is
had it
referring
open
to.
in the computer, but
So that should remain open.
I think it might be the top one.
So Amy, that's ROC 18/64610.
Sorry, 1864
610.
610.
Yes, Mr. Cosrelli.
I guess the reason why I suggested that they be deleted is that we've got another resolution at council to have a workshop.
Okay.
So that's the reason why I say we don't need them anymore, because we're already.
I can't even remember what the workshop was for.
It was for to review the procurement procedures and policies.
we have another another.
The council resolution was that we have a whole workshop from the audit committee.
Okay, so we've got two there that we're proposing removing. Are you still wanting to remove that second one, or are you happy if there's a...
That's fine.
Okay, so just the first one, sorry, Amy.
Okay.
Those resolutions get forwarded to the workshop.
Sorry.
So what was the question, Councillor Wilson?
Sorry, Your Worship, I was thinking out loud whether it would be better to refer those resolutions to the workshop rather than just releasing them.
I don't actually know what the resolutions are because it's not written here.
Which is why I worry that maybe the logic and rationale of those motions will be lost if we don't.
I suspect this was one that resulted from the Auditor General's report on procurement, and it was suggested that there be a comprehensive review of our procurement framework, which is something that we're undertaking now, and we'll be having a discussion with Council. So that was actually a Council resolution, November.
Okay. So, Councillor Wilson?
Sorry, just before the officer recommendation be put, I rise to ask a question about the visibility that councillors have over the live resolutions, and I'm wondering if there's somewhere on the intraweb that we have access to the whole body of resolutions that are still live?
Yes, just so happens over the last week we've created a project register of every activity, every project. That register will also capture our asset management projects as well as corporate business planning priorities, and I'm also considering incorporating all council resolutions within that. So we have a one-stop shop that will sit on our intranet and will also be accessible by council. This will be showcased to council in January as part of the commencement of our mid-year review budget discussions, to open up this discussion with council to test and see whether all these projects are still a priority and which ones absolutely you want to see completed by the 30th of June, and that may require us realigning some of our priorities and also our budget. So the commencement of that discussion will happen at our 2-day workshop that we have planned on the 16th and 17th of January.
So just want to acknowledge MJ as well. I'm not sure if you all know MJ that does our IT, but at the strategic planning day that the staff were all involved with last week, she did an amazing job of pulling something together during the course of those 2 days to allow this to actually already be functional, and the staff are busy putting everything, entering all that information at this point so that it will be usable in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Your Worship. Does her genius extend to being able to have folders on the councillor's porthole for looking at documents, or some method of alphabetised storage?
If you send me through your requirements, she's a genius.
Yeah. So I've previously had discussions with MJ about this, and she shared our frustration with the format at present, and I think some of the limitation was around the back of the website, but there's been a lot of discussions with the website designers in the last couple of weeks, and it sounds like there's been some good progress made in order to help it deliver what we actually are wanting from our website, not just the council portal. So there is improvement on the way. Councillor Hamilton? No. Okay, so just to be clear, we've removed ROC 17/57461. Councillor Hamilton, you still wanted to remove the one on the top of the second page?
No, it's fine.
No? Okay, so Amy, it's only that first one. Do we have a mover for the officer recommendation excluding that motion that I just identified? Councillor Quinton, seconded. Councillor Wilson, all those in favour? It's been carried unanimously. Moving on to 11.1, which is Councillor Quinton's notice of motion around the street doctor. I just had a question around this. I know some of the staff raised concerns about projects that pop up like this. Obviously there's a good motive behind Councillor Quinton's notice of motion here, and there's an identified need. I'm just wondering, those concerns, it's a small discrete project, would it be particularly problematic for the staff if this was to be passed tonight?
Well, I guess first we don't know what the value of the project is.
I guess that's what she's asked. Do you mean the value as in the monetary value?
Yeah.
I think that's part of her request, though. Yeah.
And whether it can be done within that time, I guess that's the other question. And if it was all for consideration, I would see that as part of next year's budget rather than year review.
So just to clarify, you're saying you're not sure if it could be done within that time. So she's asking the staff at this point to investigate and have a conversation with the staff to see what they would need.
It's just another project.
No, I understand that. That's why I'm asking it. Like, it is a fairly small, discrete project, and I understand the rationale for putting it forward, but I'm just trying to get some clarification as to, I know that there were concerns raised about it being another project, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks around the number of projects and wanting to make sure that we're time and resources are directed towards the priorities. I'm just, because it is a small discrete project, I'm just trying to get clarification as to whether or not, if council passed this in order to meet the identified needs, if it would be overly onerous.
Look, I guess it's a matter for council, but I couldn't guarantee that it would be in the budget for the mid-year review, that's all. That's probably a way to put it.
Can I suggest next month we're actually having a look at the mid-year review and all our outstanding projects, that it would be an optimal time to have that discussion then to see where this might fit with the other projects, and if this is a priority, we'll make sure that it happens by the 30th of June and the funds are available. But that's...
Yeah. I just
Sorry,
had a conversation.
can I, that's exactly what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for anything different. All I'm asking for is a report, and a conversation is had between the staff and the street doctor and the outreach workers, and that information comes to us for that January workshop or whenever we have our mid-year review, so that we are armed with the information in order to make a considered decision about it at the mid-year review. All I'm asking for is a conversation to be had.
And a general costing, so that we've got some indication. Yeah. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got a question for Councillor Quinton. So related to the comfort and the amenity of the people that are using the street doctor service there at Ashfield Reserve, I had raised with me by one of the shopkeepers at the Ashfield shops across the road from there, the state of cleanliness of the toilets, and also the absence of seats in the toilets, and that it presents as an unclean and cold environment for people that need to use them. And I'm just wondering whether you would be amenable to including some words in there that would broaden that conversation to include the comfort and the amenity of the toilets, and whether the cleaning contractors, who I think we currently engage, meeting the terms and the requirements of the contract.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Councillor Hamilton?
If it's being expanded,
Yes.
as Councillor Wilson has suggested, to the amenities around it, I'm leaning towards thinking that perhaps this should be a discussion in January at the two-day workshop. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to look at that area holistically, then I'm not entirely sure that giving staff direction in just one or two areas is going to work.
Councillor Gandrel?
Yes, thank you. Just in relation to now the extended motion that's been put forward, I was happy with the motion that's on the agenda, but with the extended motion, wouldn't that not potentially have to be, if you're looking at the design of the toilets, the actual toilets may need to be replaced if you wish to have toilets with seats on them? Are they toilets that are able to have retrofitted seating?
No, I think the intention of Councillor Wilson's amendment would be just to give us the information so that we can make a considered decision.
Well, no, because the motion says for it to be implemented, though, potentially in the financial review.
No, there's no implementation. All Councillor Quinton's asking for at this point is to have a conversation, find out what the need is, and some rough costing, so that if council supports this in the mid-year budget review or in the budget for the following financial year, that we'd have the information to base that decision on. Is that correct, Councillor?
That is correct.
Okay, Councillor Wilson?
I'd like to second Councillor Quinton's motion.
So I'm just a bit confused. Do we have wording for the motion now? Because we've had an additional point added in from Councillor
I think
Wilson.
for ease of just passing the motion, we can have a discussion about cleanliness of toilets at the time.
Okay,
when we talk about
so we're talking about the motion as written. Are you still happy to second it, Councillor Wilson?
I am.
Okay, is there anybody against the motion? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.2, Councillor Quinton again, your notice of motion for the Early Childhood Australia campaign.
Yes, I made it.
Any questions? No, so we've got a mover, seconder. Councillor Wilson, anybody against? All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Councillor Ganjul, will you?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Look, having had discussions with the CEO and understanding that we do have our CCTV trailer in the location currently, I'm happy to withdraw my notice of motion.
Okay, just so that other councillors are aware, there's been some discussions around that have been prompted by this notice of motion and some of the other projects in the budget around CCTV about how we can look a little bit more holistically at safety and crime prevention in our community. There's been some discussion around potentially in the next financial year having as a project developing a strategy that will have a look over the whole community and where the priorities are and what we can put in place rather than picking out locations not necessarily based on objective information. And yes, the mobile CCTV trailer, the intention is to use that at this location periodically, or is there a
yes, the mobile CCTV trailer was installed there this afternoon, about 12:30, and it'll be on site for probably the next 2 weeks, and then we'll have it on it's on rotation anyway around the town, but it'll be rotated back to there. So our ranger team will be observing that because it's there overnight, just in regards to vandalism for that. So we'll be keeping our eye on that and making sure it actually has to be attached to one of the trees which is there. So we'll be keeping an eye on that in regards to it charging because it's powered by solar energy, making sure it's charging the battery so it can continue to monitor the site.
Great, thank you. Okay, 11.4, Councillor Hamilton, your notice of motion about changing the permitted use of properties. Are there questions at all? Okay, so moved by Councillor Hamilton. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Anybody against? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so are there any announcements of notices of motion for the next meeting? Okay, in which case we'll move on to confidential business. Is there a mover to go behind closed doors? Councillor Hamilton, seconded Councillor Ganjul. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously.